Today we're going to talk about a form of communication and its connection to digital signage that's actually kind of an old way of communicating, but it has a new label: asynchronous communication. Don't that sound fancy? Joining me today is Debbie DeWitt, Marketing Communications Manager for Visix. Hi Debbie, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Derek.
And of course, thank you everybody out there for listening. I remind you, you can subscribe and like and share and follow along with a transcript on the Visix website. Whether you're using digital signage or not, our podcast gives you practical tips for communications and content to better engage your audience. I'm Derek DeWitt. Welcome to Digital Signage Done Right. Okay, so let's start with something that maybe is more familiar, more relatable. Imagine you need to share an important update with 500 employees spread across multiple locations and multiple shifts. How do we do that?
Well, 5 years ago, I would have said, schedule a series of all hands meetings and then send a follow-up email. But now that's exactly kind of the wrong approach for most information. And that's where asynchronous communication comes in.
Okay, so let's start with the basics of this for anybody who might be hearing this term for the first time. In plain English, what does that mean? Asynchronous communication. Sounds smart.
Yeah, it does. It's fancy. It's really just communication that doesn't require everyone to be present or engaged at the same time. So if you think about it like this, when you send an email, you don't need the recipient to be sitting at their computer waiting for it. They can read it, and when they're ready, they process it and respond on their own schedule, usually.
Right. Obviously, we're talking about just basic emails, not ones that are flagged urgent or something like that. Your day-to-day messages that don't require some kind of immediate response. So what would be the opposite of asynchronous communication then? Like real-time interactive?
Actually, like synchronous communication, oddly enough.
Oh, wow.
Right. I mean, it is real time. It's meetings, it's phone calls, live chat, video conferences. Everybody needs to be there at that same moment. And both of these have their place, but we've historically really over-relied on synchronous methods in the workplace.
So what are some common examples of asynchronous communication that people might be using and they don't even realize that they're using it? You may already be an asynchronaut.
I like that term. Sounds like you're pioneering it. There are tons of examples. Emails, obviously, recorded video messages, shared documents and project management tools, your intranets, your internal social networks like Slack and Teams, even though they can be synchronous using chat and meetings and things, but they're often used asynchronously, like again, it's pushing out a chat, pushing out a message. And here's one people don't always think about, but traditional bulletin boards.
Which is basically what digital signage replaces. So I'd say digital signage is also this. It's basically a type of push communications.
Absolutely. Digital signage is one of the most effective forms of asynchronous communication. Needless plug for our product there, folks.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's broadcasting information continuously, but people get to consume it on their own time as they walk by. No one needs to stop what they're doing to go attend a digital signage meeting.
Right. So what's driving this recent shift in the corporate world and business communications towards this way of communicating? Why are organizations suddenly talking about this approach so much?
Yeah, like I said, it's not anything that hasn't been used before, but I think there are three major factors why it's popping up in a lot of articles and online chats. First, we've got meeting fatigue. Yeah. Studies show the average employee spends 31 hours a month in unproductive meetings. So hybrid and remote work have made it nearly impossible to get everyone in the same place at the same time comfortably. Even with online events, when you've got team members in different time zones or work in different schedules, it can be a big challenge.
Yeah, I know. I read a lot of things about how people are just exhausted by constant context switching.
Yeah, you're in the middle of something and suddenly, oh, my meeting reminder popped up. Now I got to change my whole brain.
Yeah.
So the second reason I think is this massive email overload. In addition to meetings, we're getting so many emails. So the average office worker receives 121 emails per day.
Jesus.
They spend about 23% of their time just checking messages. And that problem's severe enough that 38% of workers say email fatigue could lead them to honestly quit their jobs. So that's a productivity crisis and an employee retention risk. And I know that we've said email is asynchronous communication. The problem is, again, people are paying attention because they're realizing it's being overused.
It's also not really a great use of organizational resources. I mean, if people are spending 23% of their work time, that means more than one full workday just checking email messages.
I know. I just did my annual stats for last year. And if I combined just meetings and email and general planning and that kind of thing, it was like 17% of my time. So I'm actually under the average. And I will say, a lot of that was unproductive meetings. A lot of our meetings are productive. So there's that.
Gotcha. Right. So again, email is an asynchronous form of communication, but there's just too much of it.
Yeah. And the third thing is that there's a growing respect for people's time and attention.
Finally.
Yeah, it sounds really basic. But again, with all of the changes in hybrid and people paying attention to wellness and all of that, organizations are realizing that not every piece of information requires someone to drop everything and tune in right this second.
Yeah, I think that's a really important mindset shift, flexible workplace and the agile work environment and all that. People working from home, we're seeing that people are more productive, actually, which is better for employees and better for the organization. It's better for the bottom line.
As you were saying, interrupting that workflow to get everyone together just to tell them about like a basic policy change. If it doesn't require their input, it's really wasteful for your business and it's really frustrating for your people.
Okay, we now know what asynchronous communication is, maybe some insight into why it's trending, but let's be honest, no communication method is perfect. So let's talk about the pros and the cons. What are the biggest advantages of asynchronous communication?
Well, I'd start with flexibility and that respect for time. When you communicate asynchronously, you're essentially saying, here's the information you need. Consume it when it makes sense for your workflow. That's huge for productivity and people can stay in their flow state instead of constantly jumping into meetings.
I know we have listeners from all types of organizations, corporate offices, university campuses, schools, hospitals, and so on. So how does this flexibility play out differently in these different environments?
That's a great question. I mean, off the top of my head, in healthcare, for example, you've got shift workers who might never overlap. A nurse on night shift can't attend your 2 p.m. staff meeting, but they can certainly see important updates on a digital display in the break room, whenever they take a break. Or I'd say in higher education, students and faculty have wildly different schedules. So a digital sign in the student center could share information about registration deadlines, campus events, emergency protocols, and it's there when someone walks by, whether that's 8 a.m. or 8 p.m.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure. What else makes this type of communication so powerful?
Accessibility and inclusivity. These are big topics these days. It's really important and it often gets overlooked. Asynchronous communication gives people time to process information at their own pace. That's super important. And it's critical for neurodiverse individuals who might need a little extra processing time. Or, there are people who maybe their first language isn't English. So they can take the time they need without feeling rushed. And I'd say another thing is there's this documentation aspect. It's true for things like an intranet. Everything's there, so people can go back and reference it later if they need to. Like, how many times have you heard someone say like, oh, nobody told me about that deadline? If you don't delete the post from your intranet, well, there's a living record you can point to.
Yeah, that's true. So no excuse there, Ralph. It's been on the intranet for ages. Not our fault you don't look at it. I think that's not as true, though, as with digital signage, because one of the advantages of that is that messages retire automatically from the system when they're scheduled to. So there's not really a record there because those messages go away.
True. However, you can have those messages pop up over and over again on screens. If you have that deadline people need to know about, you can schedule a reminder to play right up until the deadline hits. You can use day parting to go like Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You don't have to have it up there all the time. The other nice way to do it, I'd say back with my intranet documentation example, use your screens to remind people they can check the intranet. That's your archive, so advertise it.
All right, fair enough. There's a scalability factor, too, which I think is another practical aspect of this.
Exactly. With asynchronous communications, you can reach unlimited number of people without requiring simultaneous attention. Think about the cost, both time and money, of getting just like 10 people together for a 1-hour meeting. That's an entire business day, 10 hours of productivity. You just sat in a room. Hope you did something useful.
I hope there were biscuits.
Yeah, always need snacks. But, with digital signage or other asynchronous methods, you create the message once, you throw it out there, and it reaches everyone without that massive time investment.
Right. Okay. All right. So those are some pretty compelling advantages. Now let's talk about challenges. Let's talk about the downsides, the cons.
I mean, the most obvious one is delayed responses. If you need an immediate answer or you're dealing with some urgent situation, this is not your friend. You don't want to do it this way because there's going to be a lag between when you send that message and when people receive it and act on it.
So there are situations where you really do sometimes need to have everybody in the room or on that call.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously, crisis communications and alerts. If you're doing a brainstorming session, I think they're better in a room. I like a whiteboard. I just do. But you can do that online. But, any sensitive conversation, obviously, back to HR. If you're complaining about those managers sending emails that need
Don't put that up on your digital signage. Use this QR code to complain about your manager today.
Right. I mean, all of those kinds of things, you want real-time interaction. And the key is knowing when to use which method.
Isn't there a risk of misunderstanding? I could imagine sometimes without that immediate back and forth, sometimes things get sort of lost in translation.
I think that's true. It's a challenge. In a live meeting, if someone gets confused, they can raise their hand. You can clarify immediately. You've got body language, tone of voice, a lot of different layers of communication that don't always translate even online in meetings. But asynchronous methods, you're going to lose that. So you have to be extra clear, extra thorough, and you need to build in mechanisms for people to ask questions or provide feedback if you can.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about, information overload. This is a constant complaint in all aspects of life these days, not just work life. Doesn't adding more of this asynchronous communication kind of just make that worse?
Yeah. I mean,
thank you for listening.
Right. And that's it. I mean, I would say just, fill in the blank. Doesn't adding more blank just make that worse? Yes, it absolutely can if you're not strategic about it. That's the whole point of this podcast.
Don't just use it as a substitute.
Yeah. And the whole thing is, you have to be strategic about your communications and all the different channels and mediums you're using and the volume and how you design them. That's what strategy is. And I will say, though, this is where digital signage actually has an advantage over things like email, because an email sits in an inbox. It wants that attention. It's like
bold.
Yeah,
it's unread.
It's staring at you. Yeah, a digital sign's there when you're ready for it. It's what I say is like ambient rather than intrusive. Like I said, you're right. Any communication channel can become noise if you're not thoughtful about what you're sharing and how often.
With asynchronous communication methods, how do you even know people are paying attention? I mean, that's got to be tough.
Well, we may have mentioned this once or twice on here, but, success measurement is the biggest challenge, engagement uncertainty. With a meeting, you can see who showed up. With an email, you might get read receipts, With a lot of asynchronous channels, including digital signage, you don't always know who saw what. So it is getting better. Modern digital signage systems give you analytics for playback or can track engagement on touchscreens, but it's something you have to plan for. You need follow-up mechanisms and feedback loops.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We talk about this all the time. You can and should build in ROI measures. Honestly, something as simple as a QR code. I mean, you could use short URLs, but no one will remember them. Just use the QR code in your digital signage designs, and you'll automatically get some sort of metrics and a way for people to interact. We talk about calls to action a lot. We've talked about that in previous episodes. Check the transcript for links to those. But back to this topic, why is digital signage particularly well suited for asynchronous communication in your mind?
Well, I think it hits a sweet spot that other asynchronous methods don't quite reach. It broadcasts information continuously. It's visual, so it's processed very quickly. And this is the key, is that it's non-intrusive. Again, like that email notification that pings you or the Teams message that pulls your attention away from whatever workflow you're in, whatever headspace you're in. Digital signage is just like there. It creates what I call ambient awareness.
Ooh, I like that term, ambient awareness. I think I do. It sounds nice, but what does it mean?
Right. Is that just gibberish you've made up?
What a bunch of nice jargon.
No. I mean, Let me give you an example. Think about walking through an airport. You're not actively looking for information every single second, but you're subconsciously aware of the departure boards, the directional signage, safety messages, and all the other information that's up on screens and plaques. It's there when you need it, but it's not demanding your attention right this second. That's ambient awareness. And I think it's incredibly powerful in a workplace or in a school or campus or, public setting.
So it's there when people want it, and it's just not interrupting their flow.
Exactly. Yeah. And another advantage is passive consumption, but with active impact. How about that?
Very jargony.
Right? I'm getting a t-shirt.
Yeah.
So all that means is, people absorb information while they're already in motion. They're walking into a lobby, they're grabbing a coffee, they're waiting for an elevator. So what I mean is you're meeting them where they are, literally, without asking them to do anything special or go anywhere special or show up to a meeting or
open Outlook or whatever. Yeah. Okay. I mean, what about this always available aspect? How does that play into it?
I think it's huge. Content on digital signs typically loops, right? You've got a playlist that's going over and over. So if someone misses a message on their first walk by, they'll see it the next time or the time after that, and that really accommodates different schedules and traffic patterns. The night shift will see the same information as the day shift. The early bird student sees the same event promotion that the night owl student did.
Yeah, that's true. And, I think something people don't really consider is that digital signage, I think, can kind of bridge the gap between asynchronous and synchronous communication. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, use those digital signs to promote the synchronous things like upcoming events, tomorrow's all hands meeting, next week's training session. Those are all synchronous, but you're promoting them on asynchronous. And it works the other way too. You can provide follow-up to synchronous communications. For example, you held a town hall meeting last week where you announced some new policy. Well, not everyone could attend. So put the key takeaways up on digital signs for the next week. And now everybody's on the same page, whether they were in the room or not.
Yeah, I like that very, very much. Let's talk about some other content ideas that really leverage this approach. Let's start with corporate environments.
Sure. So in a corporate setting, digital signage is perfect for passive announcements, things like policy updates, deadlines, reminders. We have a new brochure available. We've launched a new product. Remember to recycle. We always talk about celebrate birthdays and work anniversaries. Pretty much any information someone needs to know. Well, not someone, everyone needs to know, but doesn't require face-to-face communication.
Right, because like you said, people can absorb it at their own pace. It's nice to know that this is Julie's 5-year anniversary working at the company, but, I don't need to know that right this second. I'll get around to it, and then I'm glad I did.
Unless there's cake in the break room, then you need to know now.
Right now. That's synchronous. Cake synchronous. I also thinking of data visualizations that are used on digital signs. People are updated on KPIs and progress towards goals. You've got things like countdowns. You got things like menu boards, all these sorts of things as well. And like you said, promote upcoming events, show a daily event schedule for meetings that, nobody really wants to attend, but they may have to.
Exactly.
Oh, good. Another meeting. Yay.
Or you can celebrate. Look at all those meetings I'm not in. But I think using digital signage for project milestones and team celebrations is something I really like. Engineering team hit their delivery target 2 weeks early, or sales team closed the biggest deal of the quarter. Kudos all the time, man. Yeah. Recognizing achievement and building culture without having everyone have to stop what they're doing and be there.
Yeah, that's true. And what about like training and safety content? Same kind of idea, right?
Yeah, it's perfect for digital signage. Quick training tips, safety reminders, cybersecurity best practices.
Boy, no kidding. Stop clicking on those phish emails.
Exactly. Or, remember to lock your computer when you step away. Phishing attempts are up this quarter. Be vigilant. These are small reminders that reinforce some of the formal training you may have given without being overwhelming. And I'd say another big one is highlight employee resources. A lot of companies have like amazing benefits or wellness initiatives that people don't even know about. And what happens is, especially if you have a lot of longtime employees, you may forget that you've hired a couple people this year. And so they didn't see this campaign when you did it last time. So make sure you're showing things that are like, did you know we offer free financial planning, or mental health days are part of your PTO? Use them.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, what about like educational institutions? Obviously, a lot of these things apply there as well. But schools and universities are very kind of different, maybe more flexible, more dynamic environments. What should they be thinking about when creating content for their audiences?
Yeah, like you said, these are diverse audiences and diverse schedules too.
Yeah.
So I think for your digital signage content, you start with the basics, event calendars, deadline reminders, course registration closes Friday, or, there's a career fair in the student center tomorrow at 3. I think another thing we talk about a lot on campuses is emergency notifications. You're going to have weather alerts. You'll have campus security updates. Pretty much any situation where you need to get information out fast to everyone, those screens can be updated instantly, either in one building or across campus, the whole system. You can choose where it goes, but I think that's a big one that you need to think about.
Yeah, and the screens are right there. I don't have to open up my email program or Teams or whatever in order to see it.
I will say this, with any emergency alerts, it needs to be multi-platform, probably text messaging. Most campuses have something in place, and digital signage is one part of that.
Right. And digital signage is also, I think, good for community building too, yeah?
Yeah, especially in like K-12 schools, student achievement spotlights are huge. You really want to give a lot of reinforcement there. Congratulations to the robotics team for winning regionals. Club
The robotics team in K-12. Boy, I wish there'd been such a thing when I was in high school. That would have been cool.
I had to take typing. Now it's like programming. High school.
Home ec.
Yeah. Oh, I had to take that too. I had to sew a smock.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, clubs and organizations are huge with K-12 content. Study tips during, like final test weeks or working up to the SATs, inspirational quotes and wellness stuff. Again,
I think young people respond to those a lot.
Yeah.
They don't seem hokey to them. They're like, thanks, I needed that boost.
No, I think you have to know your audience, and you have to know that public recognition is huge for younger people right now. They've grown up with social media, and they're used to, unfortunately negative, but positive reinforcement being in a public setting is something you need to think about.
Yeah. What about like career services? That also seems like a natural fit, especially for, juniors and seniors in high school.
Yeah, I think absolutely. There's career services, sometimes like free resume reviews, job placement programs, internship opportunities. I think, whether it's a campus or even some of this in K-12, but mainly campuses, as students are moving between classes, you can catch them with that information and give them something like, appointment reminders, or perhaps you've got specialists in, or like I said, that career fair, you want to remind them of that, and reminding them of that while they're in transition is perfect.
Because they are, in a larger sense, in transition.
Ooh, nice.
What about healthcare facilities? That's a pretty unique environment, and I think there are specific communication challenges there.
I think it's less of a challenge, and so it's more that you've got different audiences, multiple audiences. You've got your patients, you've got visitors, you've got staff, and the staff is several different layers. So I think they're often looking at the same screens. So you have to segment that. I think for staff, you can share like wait time updates, queue management info, upcoming training, certifications, employee wellness. You do all of that though in staff facing screens. You don't need to have that in your lobby. Obviously for patients and visitors, digital signage is great for wayfinding. You can use a map to navigate the hospital, have department locations or provider directories. I think sharing general health tips, infectious control protocols, hygiene reminders like washing your hands, that's always very relevant. And I think, right now you can get rid of some of that general info that they might go to the reception desk for, like patient rights or a satisfaction survey prompt, things like that.
So the asynchronous nature of these kinds of communications, I would think, would be especially valuable in healthcare because, like you said, different shifts. These things are open 24 hours a day. You have 3 different shifts.
Yeah. I mean, you might have nurses who haven't seen each other in weeks because they're on different shifts. So digital signage ensures they're all getting that same information about, protocol changes or new equipment or upcoming events.
Okay, let's talk about one more, retail and hospitality environments. So how does digital signage work there? Because really, like you said, with healthcare, different audiences, Retail hospitality, you certainly have two. You've got customers and you have the employees. And again, never the twain shall meet. They don't all need to see exactly the same thing. Customers, I think, are usually going to see like ads for products and services, daily specials on sales, branded content. If you're in like a hotel or a convention center, maybe you put up group welcomes or promote on-site services. Hey, here's a place to get your haircut. Here's a place to get a coffee, etc.
Yeah, and you're going to see a lot of event schedules in those, and especially with like breakout rooms and ballrooms in hospitality, you're going to see those listings of who's in what room. I think for employees, you can share operational updates. Again, those training reminders, employee recognition. But in any environment, you can also use digital signage to communicate your company values and your community involvement. I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot. You want to tell people, hey, we donated 10,000 meals to the local food bank this quarter, or our sustainability initiatives reduced waste by 40%. It builds pride and engagement among the staff.
Well, those are great examples. But I know that some of our listeners might be thinking like, I don't know, God, that sounds like a lot of different content to manage. What are some of your best practices for making this actually work?
Well, we have a lot of advice in these podcast episodes. We've got guides and we've got white papers you can download for specific ideas. But just to go through some of the biggest ones, I'd say the first rule is always to keep your messages concise. The rule of thumb is keep the text short and sweet, 7 to 10 seconds of viewing time per message. People are walking by, not stopping to read a novel.
Yeah, right. We're talking basically headlines and key points here, bullet points. You don't even need to use grammatically correct sentences as long as there's a verb and a noun, and maybe the noun is implied. If someone's in a waiting room or a break room or someplace where they maybe have more dwell time, all right, you could maybe toss in some more detail. But especially in high traffic areas where people are breezing through, I think you should keep it short and keep it punchy.
Yeah, and I will just do a shameless plug here for our new AI assistant that's in our CMS. You can actually, when you're using our templates, type in whatever text you have. Maybe you did have a paragraph, and you can actually ask it to play with that text and shorten it for you, make it, funny. There are like 5 different tones of voice: of professional, friendly but professional, and short as possible is probably the one I would recommend the most.
Right. So you can show those short ones in the lobby and the longer ones in the break room.
No, I would say short ones in the lobby and longer ones on your intranet. I would never put a long paragraph on a digital sign at all.
Right. How about refresh rates? How often should we be changing this content?
I think you got to do it regularly. If people see the same message for 3 months, it just becomes wallpaper. They're going to stop noticing it. I usually recommend a mix of that, timely, urgent information that changes every day or weekly, and then have some evergreen content that can stay in rotation longer. But I will say, even the evergreen content, I'd say minimum every 6 months. Like, just change the colors. Change something on that design so that it catches eyes again. And also mix in some lighter content, interesting facts about the company, inspirational messages, trivia. It keeps people engaged, and it actually makes the important messages stand out more. And again, another shameless plug. Yay! We just launched our Good Vibes feed, which is all that. It is like dad jokes and trivia and inspirational messages, and it's really fun, and it's a great alternative to, let's be honest, what's kind of downer news. A lot of people are not wanting to show like news headlines or news feeds right now. Right. So they're like, can we get something else up there? Good vibes.
Yeah, but keep in mind, even the call it fluffier stuff, like every piece of content should have a clear purpose. You have to ask yourself, what do I want someone to do or know after seeing this? And it might be just keep them engaged, amuse them, make them enjoy the experience of interacting with the digital signage.
Yeah, I want to make these people smile today.
Yeah. And of course, every message should have a call to action. It might be visit HR for more details, or go talk to the accountants, or most often, I think, scan this QR code to register, or to sign up, or to learn more, or whatever, or ask your manager about this program, whatever it is. You should, whenever possible, give people a next step to follow. If there is one. If it's a dad joke, I don't know that you need to have a QR code.
That's true. But yeah, that's the only way you're going to get feedback and measure your success.
So how does digital signage fit into like the broader communication strategy? Should it be a standalone thing or should it be integrated into everything?
I think you know the answer to that, but thanks.
I did. That's
Thanks.
just a setup.
Thanks for the setup. Definitely integrated. Digital signage should complement, not replace your other communication channels. Think of it as part of a multi-channel strategy. For example, you might announce a new initiative via email, reinforce it with digital signage content for 2 weeks, discuss it in team meetings, and then put a summary document on the intranet. Each channel serves its own purpose, and every organization is going to have a blend of synchronous and asynchronous communications.
So really, you're talking about creating consistency across the channels. I think that's crucial. If the email you send out says one thing, but your digital signage, which is supposed to reinforce that email, says something different, now you're just creating confusion.
Yeah, all of your messaging has to align and support each other.
All right, so what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this episode about asynchronous communications?
I'll say this. If every message is urgent, nothing is urgent.
Yeah, that's for sure. The best communication isn't always the loudest or the most immediate. Sometimes it's the message that's there exactly when somebody needs it.
Perfectly said.
Asynchronous communication, especially through digital signage, is really all about respecting people's time and attention and flows. In a world where we're constantly interrupted and overwhelmed, giving people information they can access on their own terms is actually kind of a gift. So here's my challenge to everybody listening. Audit your current communication mix. Where are you over-relying on synchronous methods like meetings or real-time calls, where asynchronous communication might actually be more effective? Where could digital signage fill gaps in your current strategy? And what information are you struggling to share that would actually work beautifully on a screen in a high-traffic area? So take 30 minutes this week, after you've finished looking at your 121 emails, to map that all out. And I think you would be surprised at what you discover.
Nice. I like the challenge.
Gauntlet thrown.
Nice. Glove is down.
The glove is down. Well, I'd like to thank my guest today for talking to me about sort of this new take on push communications, asynchronous communications. She is Debbie DeWitt. She is Marketing Communications Manager for Visix. Thanks for coming on, Deb.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. For more free stuff, head to resources on Visix.com for guides, videos, and more to help with your visual communications. Please subscribe and share, and contact us for information about our digital signage solutions.